Today we're going to read a short story through a format called Ed Puzzle, probably something you haven't used before, but I think it's worth a shot. The story is called The Future in My Arms, and it has to do with um, a community's obligation to supporting the young people of their town. We've all heard the phrase, it takes a village to raise a child, and we kind of know that if you want your town and your state and all up to your country to be successful, the next generation of people need to feel as though they are capable of leading and supporting. And the president was a high schooler once too, so we got to be able to support those people and how important it is for a community, and beyond just the parents to support the kids of the community and the value that they have to their town, and the obligation to helping those kids learn and setting them up to be successful in life. So the story is called The Future in My Arms by Edwidge Datica. She is a Haitian-born United States citizen who has written many short stories and novels as well. I had never held any living thing so tiny in my hands. 6 pounds and 1 ounce. Lighter than my smallest dumbbell was my newborn niece. Her face bright pink, her eyes tightly shut. Her body coiled around itself in a fetal position, still defiantly resisting the world into which she'd just been thrust. I had been awaiting her birth with feverish anticipation. I was going away for the summer, and I didn't want to leave before she was born, only to come back 8 weeks later to find that she had grown accustomed to most things in the world except her only auntie on her father's side, the sole woman in a family of men, who all her life had dreamed of having a sister. She arrived the day before I was to leave. I was at the Brooklyn Public Library researching an article when I called to check my messages. In a breathless voice, my brother Andre announced, "You are now the proud aunt of Nadira Amas Dentica. Her name means, 'She whom God has chosen.'" I ran out of the library and headed toward a flower shop on Flatbush Avenue. As I approached, I heard someone call out my name. It was my brother Carl and Mia, who were expecting their own child in a few months. They, too, were heading to the hospital to see Nadira. On the way there, I remembered a message that a girlfriend of mine, a new mother, had sent me for my 30th birthday a few months before. "May your arms always be a repousa, a place where a child can rest her head," it said. I had told her that 2 of my brothers were becoming fathers, and she wanted me to share these words with them. But I had decided to wait until both my niece and nephew were born to share this with their parents. That we had each become a repousa, the Haitian Creole term for sacred place, in whose shelter children would now rest. By the time we had gotten to the hospital, my sister-in-law, Carol, had already had a few visitors. She appeared exhausted but in good spirits as she and Andre took us down the corridor to the maternity ward window. Which one was Nadira? Andrew wanted us to guess, to pick her out of the rows of infants like a long-lost relative in a crowd of strangers. We were aided in our task by the small pink name tag glued to her bassinet. Carol asked if we wanted to have a closer look. We went back to the room and waited for the nurse to bring her in. We all stood up when she was carried in. I knew I was going to get ahead of myself, but this made me think of a wedding where everyone immediately and almost instinctively rises to greet the bride. She was passed from loving hand to loving hand, but I kept her longer. I would soon have to leave, so I wanted to hold her, to cradle her in my arms, to let her tiny head rest in the crook of my elbow. I wanted to watch her ever so slightly open her eyes and tighten her mouth as she battled to make sense of all the new sounds around her, all the laughter, the wild comparisons with relatives living and gone, also very present in her face. I wanted to read her the lines from Sonia Sanchez's poem at 30. I am here waiting, remembering that, once as a child, I walked 2 miles in my sleep. Did I know then where I was going? Traveling. I'm always traveling. I want to tell you about me. Here is my hand. Nadira's presence had already transformed the room. Her Opening her eyes was like a Hollywood press conference with all the video and picture cameras going off, trying to capture something that perhaps none of us knew how to express. That we had suddenly become allowed a closer view of one of life's greatest wonders, and by being there, were an extension of a miracle that happened every second of every day in every part of the world, but had generously now granted us a turn. That day, when we lined up for a glance, a touch, a picture, and tried to imagine a life for Nadira, a new country, we each made our own silent promises not to let her face that new world alone. We were telling her and her parents that we were her village, with our offers of babysitting favors, our giant teddy bears, our handfuls of flowers, and the crooks of our own arms and necks and laps, which we hoped that she would run to if she ever needed refuge. Looking back on my own 30 years, having crossed many borders, loved and lost many family and friends, young and old, to time, migrations, illnesses, I couldn't help but worry for Nadira and for my nephew yet to be born. And there ahead for them the wars, a depression, a holocaust, a new civil rights struggle as there were for those children born at the dawn of the last century. Will they have to face the colonization of new planets, genetic cloning, new forms of slavery, and other nightmares we have yet to imagine? Will we, their tiny village, give them enough love and assurance to help them survive, thrive, and even want to challenge those things? Before handing Nadira back to her parents, I felt torn between wanting her to grow up quickly so that her body might match the wits she'd need to face her future, and at the same time wanting her to stay small so that she might be easier to shield and carry along the length of our elbows to the reach of our palms. I wanted to tell her parents that though I had never held any living thing so tiny in my hands, I had never held anything so grand either. A bundle so elaborately complex and yet fragile, encompassing both our past and our future. Though Nadira and my soon-to-arrive nephew were not created specifically with me in mind, I felt as though they were the most magical gifts that could ever have blessed the 30th year of my life. Humbled by my responsibility to them, I silently promised their parents that for the next 30 years and the 30 after that, my heart and soul would be their children's repausa, a sacred place where they would always find rest.